Beautiful Sunday morning, although it's a little gray and foggy where I am, but hey, it's beauty of a kind, right? Yeah, so how are you guys? Hope all is well. Hope your week has been good. Hope your weekend has been better. And I hope the week ahead goes well. Who's joining me before we get into the meat of today's presentation? Chicago Mike, good morning. Ryan R., good morning. Noah Asensio, good morning. What is it now? Dax Duke of Cheesecake, good morning. Mike R., good morning. The Original Shroom, good morning. TC, good morning. Somnamnul Nation, good morning. JMK, good morning. Shadow Claw, good morning. Kyle Mack, good morning. Old Guy Gamer, good morning. And I think that's everybody I see. So if you happen to be lurking or in the future, good morning to you. Good morning to you. Robert Pincus, good morning. Pissed Off Shih Tzu, good morning, as people start to get into the show. So I came across this yesterday, and it was a kind of a conundrum to me, because I can't say that I've ever heard the term put this particular way ever before. Fair chance hiring. Now, it sounds like one of those, well, duh, kind of statements, right? I mean, that's supposedly what we've been working towards bit by bit, day by day, since at least the Civil Rights Act, and before that even, right? Fair chance hiring. Because when I put that through my brain, my sort of spelling bee, break it down by its component parts kind of brain, I think I know what it means, right? Fair chance hiring. What does that mean to me? Well, I would think that it means you have a job description, you set out what the prerequisites are for being able to fulfill the terms of that job or the needs of that job. You put that job description out into the world, and you see who applies for it, and then you assess the applicants on the basis of, do they possess those skills, and or can they argue for their equivalency? And then you take a look at the candidates you have, and you make a decision based on who best fits the terms of the job description. That's what, in my mind, I think fair chance hiring would be. But then I looked at the title of the presentation: Good for Justice, Good for Business. Okay, well, the business thing maybe, but justice? What do you mean justice? If you're just talking about like fairness, I guess, but then the question mark goes in my head. Do I have an understanding just based on the words, or is this one of those things where the words don't necessarily mean what I think the words mean? I don't know. This is going to be a wholly educational presentation for me, because I want to learn what is fair chance hiring insofar as the parlance of the industry, whatever that is. An editorial note, there was a section right at the beginning, 2 or 3 some odd minutes, where the presenter goes over with the audience taking a survey on an app that they apparently have set up for this presentation. Nothing dealing with the actual discussion or panel is in that, so I took that out. Otherwise, I haven't listened to anything of the actual panel discussion itself. So there'll be a brief moment after a minute or two of the opening portion of the presentation where the screen goes black. That's just the cutoff between the two sections. If you'd like to watch the presentation in its entirety, a link is in the descriptions. That's the only editorial thing. Otherwise, I haven't watched any of this, and I am very glad we are slowly moving back to the good old days of in-person, on-stage panel discussions. We're moving back to those pre-COVID days where everybody was fine getting up on a stage together in person and having a discussion. I appreciate those better than, wonky Zoom calls. So a couple more hellos, and then we'll get into it. Cephtus Wolf, good morning. Mike Savage, good morning. Pie Guy 07, good morning. Tyrannus Alexandrius Tremere Lich, good morning. Cannibalistic Wizard, good morning. And Zero the Hero 909, good morning. And if I didn't already say so, Absolutely Degenerate, good morning. Lurking Gopher, good morning. Keldrig, good morning. Boy, oh boy, good morning, everybody. Again, if I missed you, if you're lurking, if you're in the future, good morning. All right, so this clocks in at just over 48 minutes. I'll be going for an hour and a half in real time, unless there's a compelling reason to do otherwise. Yes, we have a panel discussion. Fair chance hiring good for justice, good for business.
So welcome. My name is Lucretia Murphy. I'm a vice president at Jobs for the Future and the director for the Center for Justice and Economic Advancement. We want to welcome you all. Thank you for joining this session on fair chance hiring, where we talk about the strategies that are both good for justice and good for business. And we're just so glad that you all are here.
You guys hear that all right? Let me know in the chat. It will move on to an actual shot of the group. I don't know how long this title card stays up, but I'm sure they'll go over it individually. But just for clarity, our speakers are today, and I'm going to attempt at some of these names. Maha Jawed, Chief Strategy Officer, Responsible Business Initiative for Justice. Shamia Lodge, Fellow, CEO, Action, Racial Equity at Mass Mutual. Okay, Lucretia Murphy, as she said, Director for the Center for Justice and Economic Advancement, Jobs for the Future. And lastly, Ken Oliver, Executive Director of Corporate Social Responsibility at Checker. Social responsibility, justice, racial equity, and justice. All right.
For this conversation. And on the panel with me, I'll just introduce them briefly here, but their bios are in the agenda and in the app. Shamia Lodge, she's a fellow with the CEO for Racial Action. Maha Jawed, Chief Chief Strategy Officer for Responsible Business Initiatives and Justice. And Ken Oliver, who's I talk to Ken 100 times a week, and his title is what, Ken?
I'm the VP of Checker.org.
VP of Checker.org.
I talk to Ken several times a week. I have no idea what he does.
But all their bios are in the app for you there.
The app.
So we'll address all of those. That's great. We'll talk about that now. And I think
yeah, that was the jump. So after that, she just went over 2 or 3 minutes of instructing the audience on how to do the app. And the app was basically a survey that said, hey, are you an employer? Are you an investor? That kind of thing. That's all that was.
Kick off the first segment of that, really thinking about what fair chance hiring is. I'm going to direct a question to Ken, because I think, Ken, a lot of people come to an understanding of fair chance hiring maybe is just about hiring.
Why would I possibly come to a conclusion about fair chance hiring is just about hiring when it's got hiring in the name? I don't know.
What is the relationship with justice? But I wonder if you might want to talk a little bit about really what fair chance hiring is, but what its impact can be if we think about it as actually a tool for justice.
Sure.
Okay, so this is where, thankfully, I'm glad we're right into it. We don't have a whole lot of preamble or anything else. We're not going through everybody making their statements or anything. What is the definition? Because I, sincerely, no hyperbole, I have no idea. I've never heard that term before, as far as I can tell, in the course of 6 some odd years of looking at hiring and recruitment practices in businesses and things like that. So this is news to me and maybe news to you. Let's learn.
Sure. It's a great question about what fair chance is. Fair chance is really providing people who have been impacted by the justice system with a fair and just opportunity to access work.
Oh, okay. So now I have come across that concept previously, long ago, on a completely different panel discussion where they were talking about diversity and inclusion and everything. There were like 4 ladies on the stage, and 3 of them talked about your standard DEI practices. And the 4th lady, when it came down to diversity, she said, well, and I forget her name, it's been many years now, but and I'm summarizing, but she said, well, at our company, what we do is we take a look at people who have been convicted of crimes, and because that's a demographic that is often immediately shunned or overlooked or everything as far as job possibilities because of past bad acts. And so what we do is we take a look and invite people who have had criminal backgrounds in order to provide them a second chance. And so, you know, there's certain limitations they took into consideration, like, you know, how long has it been since the crime took place, the level of the crime and so on. But having a criminal history does not necessarily exclude you from consideration for employment. And that was one of their initiatives at this company. And I thought, okay, now that's a different take on diversity. And the way that she described it, I recall, stood out to me so much that I made a point of it in my video. So if that's what fair chance hiring is, then maybe I'm on board.
The term originally started several years ago as a result of difficulties that formerly incarcerated people and people with records had in accessing employment.
Okay.
So several laws started to sweep the country. Things you might know as ban the box, which required employers not to ask a question about whether someone had been convicted of a crime or not, or arrested for a crime. And then that has kind of advanced and gained some traction to have some sweeping laws called the Fair Chance Act, both on a federal level in 37 states, I think, across the country. This has been a very important movement and continues to be, because there are 70 million people in America that have some form of arrest or conviction on their record.
Okay, well, maybe they can't ask you on the application if you've been convicted of a crime. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've had to apply for a job. But in just about every job I've gone to, they have requested authorization to do a background check, which would include a criminal background check. So it's still something that employers, as far as I know, do on a regular basis. Even if they can't ask you outright, they will, if they're responsible at least, make an attempt to verify if you do have some kind of criminal background.
Which is about 1/3 of the workforce. So when you think about the current labor shortages and you think about some of the difficulties it is for major companies and smaller companies too to source talent, we really have to start thinking about different ways to access talent pipelines. And people with criminal records are a great source of workers and labor pools. And the impact is very, very important as well, because one of the things that drives mass incarceration, drives recidivism, is poverty and lack of access to work.
Okay, now the whole mass incarceration thing always sounds like a conspiracy theory to me, as though, you know, paddy wagons are just driving around throwing people in and processing them into jail without any kind of due process. But that aside, yes, if you do not have the access to make a living for yourself, the likelihood that you'll do something untoward to survive goes up dramatically. So in that regard, sure. But it really comes down to how long ago the crime occurred, the severity of the crime, and ultimately it's up to the discretion of the employer if they're comfortable employing someone depending on their criminal history. Should an employer be disallowed from discriminating against a potential employee on the basis of a criminal history? As far as I know, that's not in the laws anywhere, but I'm not quite sure of the terms of the Fair Chance Act that he mentioned or what that is supposed to say. If that just says that you're not allowed to ask that question up front in the course of a job interview, okay. But I don't think, and again, I'm happy to be corrected, I don't think that precludes an employer from doing a background check.
And a lot of people don't understand why there are all these collateral consequences after someone has been incarcerated. But there's been this like policy that's followed the American social system from King's England, where there was this notion of civil death, where once you were convicted or violated a law, you lost all of your civil rights. And so we've never kind of really gotten away from that. And so now it's created this second-class citizenry in America where people have difficulties rebuilding their lives, resetting their lives to access things like housing, things we take for granted every day. Things like livable wage employment, something else we take for granted every day.
Now, there is something to be said to the idea that if you've served your time, your time should have been served. There are exceptions, of course, you know, like being on the sexual offender registry, or, you know, not having access to a firearm because of some other criminal conviction or something. That part's still kind of hazy to me as far as the Constitution is concerned. I'm still not quite sure about that one, but there are some reasonable, I think, consequences to certain crimes being committed that few people would be able to argue with. But if you have some kind of minor infraction, or even something that could be considered violent but happened 10 years ago, and you've had absolutely no criminal history since or anything like that, something like that, consideration should be allowed to move on from that. And some states have the ability, you can expunge records after a certain amount of time, depending on the circumstances of the crime and what you've done in the meantime. So there are avenues of redress for some people if they've kept their proverbial nose clean after being convicted of a crime. But sure, if you've served your time, then by all sort of social contract rights, at that point, you should be on an even keel. But there is a stigma. There is a stigma, and you have to sort of regain the trust of society. And that's why I think, expungement and time served plus good behavior and so on after you're out, a showing to society that you have learned your lesson, is something that people, I think, understandably need to have. But okay.
Things like access to social services and even college and schools in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important from an equity standpoint to be able to provide each and every person, whether they have a record or not, equal access to the American economy and to the middle class economy, to help fuel decarceration and stop relying so much on punishment and really invest in people.
Raise your hand in the audience to say that you're employers or impact investors. I wonder, Shamai, if you want to talk a little bit about, through your work, what are some of the initial challenges or concerns that employers may have as they're thinking about implementing fair chance hiring? And then what do you see as the strategies that help people really move to implement and seeing the benefits of it?
Okay, real quick, since this is a very topical and interesting conversation, I'm going to go to the chat real quick. Shadowclaw Scriblade, I think if you served your life, or maybe you mean your time, and turned your life around, you should be able to regain certain rights. Yeah, I mean, again, it would depend on the severity of the crime and the circumstances. Certain standards would have to be set, and certain leeway would have to be there for, depending on what the crime was or the attitude or behavior of the individual. But by all rights, if I commit a crime and they say you shall be incarcerated for this amount of time, or you shall serve a punishment of this amount of time, or this is what you have to do to redress your wrong, and you've done so, and you haven't behaved badly in some period of time afterwards, I don't see why you can't be allowed or shouldn't be allowed to move forward without any particular restrictions. Again, depends on the circumstances in particular, but I remember an employer I worked for, his basic policy was, I don't care if you've had a criminal record, as long as nothing has occurred within the last 7 years. That was like his weird cutoff. It was like a 7-year thing. If you've had nothing happen in the last 7 years, or I find a case on you from 10 years ago, unless it's some kind of crime of, some major crime, like murder or sexual assault or something crazy like that. I mean, he'd probably have a cutoff at that. But generally speaking, if you had an assault charge from 10 years ago and nothing since, he wouldn't care. If a background check brought back something like that, it wouldn't be a showstopper. Again, up to his discretion and depending on the circumstances he could discover. But otherwise, yeah. But if you've done your time, that should be, that's supposedly the social contract exchange of things. I did wrong. Society has punished me. I served my punishment. And now, for all intents and purposes, I should be able to try to regain my footing in life. I don't think simply having a criminal conviction without any other context means that you should no longer be able to participate in society, in the economy, and so on. Somnambulation. On the other hand, I also believe in 3 strikes, you're out. If you have 2 second chances and still can't stay out of prison, death is the last sentence. Okay. Well, depends on what we're talking about. If you steal 3 bikes, I don't think you should get the gallows. But, if you have a pattern of behavior that doesn't look like it's going to subside, I wouldn't blame an employer for having questions or being hesitant to hire somebody. Mike Savage, depends on the crime. 3rd strike should get much longer for nonviolent ones. Violent ones bury in the prison. Again, circumstances matter, context matters. So anyway, so far, at least on principle, I don't have a problem with what is being described as fair chance hiring. But let's keep going.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lucretia. It's a great question, and I'm so happy to be here. And before I actually talk about my work, I do just want to talk about the fellowship that I'm currently at. So CEO Action for Racial Equity is a fellowship that was actually birthed right after the murder of George Floyd in the
Of course it was.
summer of 2020. And so it's the brainchild of the CEO and chairman of PricewaterhouseCoopers.
PricewaterhouseCoopers. I've done several streams in the past and videos on people from PricewaterhouseCoopers talking about their initiatives since George Floyd and so on. They're a big driver in this corporate responsibility post George Floyd. It's been interesting to see.
PwC, and it's really a spinoff to CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, which has been around for about 6 years. And a little over 2,500 CEOs have signed the pledge to be more inclusive from a diversity perspective. And so I'm at this fellowship, and I've been at the fellowship for 2 years, and I just read our mission and vision statement. And so our mission is to identify, develop, and promote scalable and sustainable public policies and corporate engagement strategies that will address systemic racism, social injustice, and improve societal well-being. While our vision is to improve the quality of life for the 47 million Black Americans through advocacy and advancement of solutions that seek to end systemic racism.
So in order to oppose systemic racism, you have a mission statement that singles out a specific race for assistance. Right. I think I might have spotted a contradiction and or a hypocrisy in your own mission statement, but oh well.
So for the past 2 years, I have had the honor of leading our Fair Chance Hiring Solution team. And I must say the work has just been so hard. It's really so hard to go to companies and say, hire someone who has a criminal background, right? It's just a hard conversation to wrap our minds around. Although the movement in our country is saying we have to do more for this untapped talent, it is a hard concept to wrap our minds around. Companies oftentimes know the what, they know the why, but they're struggling to figure out the how.
Okay, well, and just this is where my mind goes, just because someone has a criminal conviction does not mean they also possess talent. Okay, that's separate. A criminal conviction conceivably could be looked past if, minus that, they also possess the requisite skills, ability, education, and so on. Now, of course, depends on what kind of a job we're talking about, how complex or skills oriented the job is, but all the same, the only dividing line here is someone with a criminal conviction of some kind, right? All right. So if that's the only thing that you're worried about, why are we talking about race? And why do we assume then that talent is possessed? I mean, if you're trying to make a criminal conviction effectively the same as in, federal law, your gender, your race, your religion for the most part, and say, and by for the most part, I mean, again, it all comes down to what crime was committed, how long ago was it committed, is there a pattern of behavior, and so on. One conviction for possession of pot 10 years ago is probably not going to be that big a deal as compared to somebody who is convicted of domestic violence 3 times in a row or something, right? So you have to get more specific here. And if we're only talking about giving people who have a criminal conviction a second chance in some way, shape, or form, what does any of that have to do specifically with race?
So we actually curated a model, which it's actually impossible for companies not to lean into the approach that we created. And so we look at this 4 different ways.
Okay.
The first way is through direct hiring. And what we tell companies is, if you're in a position to hire right now, do so. But more importantly, look at your internal policies and practices and make sure it's being met from an equitable perspective. Ken talked about the 70 million individuals currently with an arrest or conviction on their background. It's trending that by the year 2030, it's going to be up to 100 million. So that's a huge problem right now we have in this country.
Well, yes, the crime rate, actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the violent crime has actually been going down year over year for several years now, despite what the media might pump up otherwise. But yes, having 100 million people who are effectively vetoed from participating in the economy or getting their lives back together in some way, shape, or form, just on the basis of a criminal conviction could be a problem. Again, depends on the conviction, depends on the circumstances. It's a case-by-case basis. Yes. Okay.
In addition to that, the reason why I wanted to read our mission and vision from a fellowship perspective is when we go to companies, we unapologetically focus on Black Americans.
By the way, guys, I'm against systemic racism, but I really want you to focus in on this particular race as being a special needs. Yeah, we're opposing systemic racism. Now, could you bake into your system a particular preference for this one race? Are you listening to yourselves? You almost had it if you hadn't added that last bit. But yeah.
And so the justice system in its entirety impacts Black Americans, Brown Americans, and poor white Americans.
Oh, no. You said you unapologetically focus on Black Americans. Well, and then you mention other people. How about just people with a criminal conviction, which just says something about the person and has nothing to do with what they look like? What more dramatic example can you make about the division between character and color of skin than do they have a criminal conviction, yes or no? Lady, come on.
So it's a socioeconomic issue at its core.
Then why are you talking about race? If it's a socioeconomic situation, if it is a criminal conviction or not situation, why bring race into it? If you're going to assess someone on their appropriateness to be included in your program, then it should be, do they have a criminal conviction, yes or no? That's it. You're the one injecting race into this. Oh, person who says you're against systemic racism.
But make no mistake, Black individuals are the most impacted by the system.
Make no mistake. Okay, I'm just going to end up repeating myself for a third time.
And so we tell companies, if you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy and you're calling it robust, it's impossible for it to be robust if it doesn't impact the system. So direct hiring. Second way to engage, we say through indirect hiring. Many individuals who are impacted by the system have to go off and become entrepreneurs because our companies just won't hire them.
Okay, I know I'm being very picky here, but this language, impacted by the system. Okay, if you're convicted of a crime, you impacted society negatively. In some way, shape, or form, you, the individual, made the decisions that impacted society negatively. Impacted by the system immediately lines anybody up in a victim narrative. Now, obviously, there are plenty of cases where people have been unfairly treated by the system. But that is on a case-by-case basis, and sometimes it's not so clear-cut, right? But to just say across the board in a swath pattern impacted by the system, we're not talking about, and I'm not going to assume, victimhood of someone who comes to the employment table with a criminal conviction. I'm going to assume someone who has done wrong and conceivably is looking to start doing right. It is an assessment of that person's character, not an assessment of them as an inherent victim. But she keeps saying impacted by the system, as though anybody in this situation just had it fall on their head from the heavens or something.
And so what we're seeing is that when these individuals return to our companies to be vendors from a supplier diversity perspective, oftentimes they're met with another no because our contractual language is not welcoming to this population.
Our contractual language is not welcoming to this population. What do you mean? I hope she gets into examples because I don't know what that means.
So we tell companies this is an indirect approach for you to get these individuals opportunities. The third way we say to engage is through your philanthropic efforts, right? And so that's an easy approach for companies.
Really?
Spend to provide and spend to workforce readiness organizations that provide these opportunities that now becomes your talent pipeline. So give to organizations that is really getting these individuals prepared for the workforce.
Is such an example your organization? Is your organization accepting philanthropic donations by any chance?
And lastly is through advocacy. And so if you're in a position to advocate on behalf of this population, you should lean into your government relations teams, your policy teams to look at policies that can support these individuals. And additionally, advocacy can also mean once you find out about this information, it's so hard to unwind it. And so each one teach one. So make sure you're telling your friends, because if someone can hire, they will do so. And so
great. And
that's great. Yeah. Okay. So victim narrative against systemic racism, but let's focus on a particular race as inherent victims. Yeah. Okay. Again, my direct experience in this has been through the couple of employers I've had that have addressed this issue. And they had something like, okay, if you have a clean record for the past 7 to 10 years or something, and the crime committed wasn't, I don't know that I ever got, I was told a specific like level of offense that was permissible to look past. I think that point it was on a case by case basis. But generally speaking, the first question is, have they had a clean record for 7 to 10 years? And after that, the considerations were, how serious of a crime was it or something like that. If that's your policy, and after that you treat anybody who comes to the table as you would any other job applicant, I'm not quite sure what more you could ask an employer to do. That's what I want to hear here more than anything else. What are the suggestions of policies or procedures that they're pushing for employers to adopt beyond giving someone a fair shake or setting some kind of time limit or something? I guess that's what I'm most curious about. But our speaker right here, she was the most entertaining so far because she went all around the place trying to justify a whole bunch of very questionable sets of notions about what she means to do and what her goals are.
We'll come back to this. One of the things we want to do after this conversation is
holy cow, lady, talking to your microphone. I can barely hear you.
Time for people to talk at their tables and also ask questions. So we'll give you a quiz.
You need to bring your microphone closer to your mouth, my dear.
On the four, and then after that, we'll let you talk a little bit about that because it's great information to process. But I want to jump on something that you just added, Shamaya, about other ways. And one of the ones you mentioned is advocacy.
There we go.
I think after George Floyd was murdered.
Yes, was murdered.
There was a lot of conversation about different ways that employers could get involved and how do you make that statement? How do you do things a little differently? How do you open up beyond maybe where the traditional corporate work had gone? And so I want to turn it over to Maha to talk a little bit.
What does George Floyd's murder have to do with giving someone a chance at employment on the basis or regardless, let's say, of their criminal history? What everybody has pointed to this particular incident as inspiring a whole panoply of different things that have absolutely nothing to do with with George Floyd. I've never understood that. It always sounds like just a convenient excuse on the back of that guy's life, whatever you think of him. Thank you, Keeverdam, so much. Fundraisers are in chat. Oh, did I miss those? Oh, thank you. Thank you. And also just woke up. Well, I hope you slept well, because I know you've been working hard lately and it's been stressful. So I'm glad you got some rest. And yes, everyone, I have to take a look at the top of the chat box to the fundraisers. So helpfully provided by Keeverdam for our friends Moonshock and Angry Illinoisian. They and their families are experiencing some hardship right now because of medical issues. Thankfully, Moonshock has come back negative for cancer for a second time, a twice survivor of cancer, thankfully. But even in the course of that, medical bills and other things are a concern. And Angry Illinoisian is dealing with a work injury that is burdening his family. So either way, if you could take a look at those, if you have a couple of bucks to spare to throw their way, that'd be greatly appreciated. And if you can't, and understand if you can't because of the time of year and the economy and everything else, if you have the ability to share those links out on your social media, that would also be greatly appreciated. So thank you. Okay, anyway, where were we again talking about? We finally get to our third speaker who hasn't spoken yet.
That from your work with Responsible Business Initiatives for Justice, how do you see corporations and how do you really help them engage kind of in a more broad way to really think about this population?
Yeah, Lucretia, and I think I'm the one to use this, right? I don't want to double up. Don't use it? I'm good. Okay. Can I give it back to you? Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel and to be with all of you. I really have been finding this conference so interesting because it's not my home. This is all a different language for me. So this panel is my language, and I know what to share up here. And just to say, really, Shemaya set me up perfectly on this idea around policy. So certainly George Floyd's murder, sadly, had to create so much will that should have been there before. But I will say on the policy front, with the business community, some of that had already been starting, I think, for the last 10, 15 years for a variety of reasons.
Yes, diversity, equity, and inclusion had been going on for years before this. And the panel discussion I saw where the lady was talking about this very subject in her own company, that occurred long before George Floyd. So yeah, everybody jumping on the George Floyd murder as, oh, now we have to do this, 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 and this, which has nothing to do with either George Floyd, how he died, or anything else, is just, it feels very, I don't know, cheap to me, a little tawdry. I mean, whatever else you might think about George Floyd, his life essentially becoming martyrdom for everyone to start talking about how virtuous they are and how they're doing this, that, and the other. I always felt a little cheap, a little tawdry. Thank you, Septus Wolf. It's sad that fentanyl murdered George Floyd. Drugs are racist. Yeah, well, God, that thing is it's such a mess. The whole thing is such a mess. The media, the activists. I mean, I watched the trial just like everybody else. I listened to the experts just like everybody else. I don't know. I'm not going to try to re-prosecute the thing here, but regardless, whatever you may think about George Floyd and his death, every time someone brings that up as their excuse for having decided to take this initiative or do this, that, or the other, or suddenly it was this watershed moment for them, I just cringe internally just a little bit. You know, either you believe in it or you needed someone to die to make a move. I just...
And so really what we're thinking about are ways in which corporate community can lend its prestige, its voice, its leadership on issues of reform. So RBIJ is our shorthand, Responsible Business Initiative for Justice. We work with companies to champion fairness and equality in systems of incarceration and punishment, broadly speaking. But generally what that means is that we're working with campaigners in the states and sometimes at the federal level around criminal justice reform priorities. And in the space of talking about employees and employers and workforce development, it's really in this area that we sort of have framed as workforce injustice.
Okay, I get it. This is what I'm hoping to hear. I want to hear some specific asks. Like, what do you want employers to do? You know, pie in the sky. What do you want employers to do? What policies do you want them to adopt? Or outside of that, what laws or reforms in policies, procedures, et cetera, do you want to see? What are you asking to have happen? I can't make an assessment of whatever it is with all your flowery, hopeful language until you get down to brass tacks.
That includes issues like clean slate. I'll come back to that. The idea of trying to help people with records have that cleaned up to the extent that they then become interesting to employers and not allow for employers just to mark them off because they have a record.
Many states have expungement laws or laws on the books that allow you to expunge your record given certain circumstances. I don't know what it is state to state. I don't know that every state allows you to do that or what they require of you to do that. So if you're trying to expand expungement opportunities in states that don't have them or try to reform those that do have them, Okay, I'm open to hearing that, because I think there's some merit to someone being able to say, hey, I have a conviction on my record from when I was 17 years old, and now I'm 30. I have had a clean record ever since. This is sitting out there. Nothing about the proportion, in the relative proportion of my life has reflected badly, and I'd like that to be taken off of consideration, etc. I think that's fair, something to that effect. And we've seen that before. So if you're looking to expand those laws, fine, okay.
It also includes bail reform, because bail actually is a workforce issue when you think about it. Money bail really only impacts poor folks, people who can't post a bond. This is before they even are convicted, let alone tried. And so in our system, many states, they still have this notion of if you have enough money, you can post a bond, post bail, and you can get out. It doesn't account for public safety risk. It doesn't account for risk of flight. So you're saying that someone with money who might be a safety risk and someone with money who might be a flight risk can still get out, and the poor person has to stay in. And what does that mean? They'll lose their job, possibly their children.
Yeah, I've done a couple of videos looking at bail reform before as well, because there is an argument there, and it's a reasonable argument, about the inherent unfairness of having your freedom put at a price that you can either pay or you can't pay. As I've said in those previous videos, I am challenged to think of what other incentives or disincentives one could apply to make sure that someone shows up for their trial and so on. And some states are trying other methods in order to determine who is held over for their trial versus who is not. And they're putting those into the hands of, say, judges through a checklist, which is an attempt to make it more fair and or pragmatic rather than being on how much money do you have. Yet you're kind of, sort of, what's the phrase I'm looking for? It's kind of 6 of one thing, half a dozen of the other, because you're just trading out someone's ability to pay with money to the discretion of a judge, which can still be biased one way or the other, depending on what we're looking at. So I understand, and it's a reasonable argument to undertake about bail reform or proposals thereof. So far, I haven't heard a reasonable alternative, but it's true. It's true. If someone can afford their freedom and someone cannot, before they've even been convicted of anything, if you've been effectively incarcerated prior to actually being tried for anything, simply on the basis of not being able to afford your freedom, that seems a bit unfair, just a bit.
It also impacts areas around driver's license issues. In this country, we take away your driver's license for anything. That includes not being able to pay a court debt. So when you can't pay a court debt, you lose your license. How do you get to work? So there's a whole bunch of issues where the justice system intersects with people's daily lives and really then impacts their ability to have a fair, chance at being able to be supporting their families and their communities.
Okay, I see plenty of possible room there for negotiation and reform. I got no problem with that.
So I'll just say a little longer on Clean Slate. Clean Slate is this growing movement across the country around ways in which you can automate sealing criminal records. And it's important to note that it's about automation. It's not about creating new opportunities for people to then have their records hidden. The idea is that generally legislatures in many states have determined that for certain offenses, if you stay crime-free for a set period of time, it is appropriate to let those offenses be pushed down. Law enforcement can still take a look, but in terms of every other sort of service that requires people to have background checks, it won't be surfaced immediately so that they can then be kicked out from the very start. For many employers, they still can ask those questions and find out, but the idea is that over time, it allows for more fairness in being able to at least have people have opportunity.
Again, if you set a very, very stringent line of what level and or class of crime qualifies for that, along with a reasonable period of time thereafter to let those records, let's say, age out of general public dissemination or view, I could see that. Again, it all depends on the specifics, but it's the same principle. Like I was talking about my boss who said, no record after 7 years and the initial crime wasn't anything, super serious or something. Okay, again, on the face of it, sounds fine.
And so this clean slate push is around automating that process. And the reason why automation is important is because for 95% of the people who are entitled to this relief, they are not getting it. Partly it's because they don't know about it, or they do and it's really complicated. It's also expensive. It can be upwards of thousands of dollars to work with a lawyer to try to get this opportunity to have your records then be sealed. Mm-hmm. So increasingly, we've been working with the business community in different states. Colorado is a good example. In June of this year, Colorado passed Clean Slate, and RBIJ worked with over 30 businesses to lend their voice again. That's through op-eds, private and public conversations with legislators, public opinion pieces that were more broadly shared, getting on podcasts on the radio, et cetera. So the idea is, again, being able to strategically work with the business voice when we know that legislators care, their employers and their investors in their communities. And the last thing I'll just say is that Clean Slate reality in Colorado meant 1.3 million people were able to have their records automatically sealed.
Okay, like I say, on the face of it, and with those terms, at least as broadly described there, that sounds fine to me. Again, I'd have to know. And obviously, Colorado's already approved it because they passed it. But I'd be curious to know, like, okay, what level of crime, or what crimes are, what crimes qualify for potential, let's say, suppression after a certain period of time. What crimes don't? Obviously, is everything else. But again, that sounds fine to me because, yeah, a lot of people aren't aware of their rights just in general. And yeah, going through legal procedures to get your records expunged or sealed or suppressed or something else, that's an additional cost to someone who's already conceivably served their time. And then with good behavior and everything else, should they then incur an additional cost? Should they then be at risk of being further punished over something that they could get sealed if only they had the knowledge, the time, or the money? Except that they do qualify for it. So yeah, that again sounds fine to me on that part of it. Let's see. Okay. Sorsha? I always mispronounce this name. Is it Sorsha? Do I have that right this time? I don't know. She just said a court debt because if she said, we take your license for not paying child support and that needs reformed, the woman would be booed off the stage. Again, when they use these very general terms, I'd need to know specifics. That's why when they just sort of use these broad terms, like what qualifies as a court debt, right? Like if I didn't pay the $50 for, the transcription fee, should that negate my ability to have a driver's license? Probably not. If I haven't paid my child support in 7 years and I've been dodging that, that probably wouldn't qualify. Somebody's going to correct me on my pronunciation, and I'm going to be very, very, very embarrassed. Dax, King of Cheesecake, stop being a bigot. Pronounce the name right, phobe. It's like I should know that by now. I really should know that by now. Lexi Mads, I still can't wrap my head around the time change on these streams. I just have it set in my head that Scribbles is 11 a.m. on Sundays and 9 p.m. on Thursdays, and I still can't adjust to the time change. The time change. I mean, depending on what coast you are, it is 11 a.m. on Sundays and 9 p.m. on Thursdays. Unless you've now... Are you on the left coast? Because, left coast is the best coast. Or something else? I don't know. All right. Oh, sorry. Duke of Cheesecake. Pardon me. Midnight in Exile. Taking away licenses for failure to pay child support makes it impossible to pay child support. There be the rub as well, right? If you take someone's ability to transport themselves away because of a debt owed, and they need that transport to make their money, then, so I guess I need to hear from somebody, what is the justification for taking away someone's ability to drive, unless of course the crime involves your ability to drive, like a DUI or a hit and run in something. Why? What is the rationale behind that? If the crime does not involve vehicular activity, or the debt does not somehow involve vehicular activity or something, why take away a driver's license for a quote unquote court debt at all? I don't know. And now I'm being rung at by somebody who doesn't know I'm on a stream. So I'm going to close that out because it's ringing in my ears right now. Okay, so let's move on.
That's a remarkable reality that then these individuals are more employable, more easily employable in their homes and in their communities.
Mm-hmm.
I'll pause there. I'll just say one more thing. The death penalty is just one more thing to share. It's a little bit out of this
The
space,
death
but just
penalty.
to also say we also work with businesses around narrative change. So just to put in your mind, again, for those employers, investors, business-minded in the room who are maybe interested in these ideas, ultimately changing the narrative around what the death penalty is has allowed for more space for others to then say, well, maybe I also disagree with the death penalty. So
the death penalty is putting someone to death for a capital crime. That's what it is. My opinion on the death penalty would be a whole other video, but where is there confusion about that?
So in 2021 at South by Southwest, Richard Branson with RBIJ launched this Business Leaders Against the Death Penalty. We have upwards of 250 business leaders who have signed on to this effort. And again, it creates space where in Utah, in Ohio, real efforts are underway to abolish the death penalty. And that's really thanks to, again, having a very strong business voice in the room.
That's got nothing to do with this topic, but okay.
And so what I'll do really is kind of summarize, because we want to get at that same idea that when businesses get involved in justice and when justice initiatives partner with business, they're not two separate arms coming together. It's really everybody going in the same direction, right?
If they were all going in the same direction, why do you guys have to work so hard to convince businesses to do this stuff? Basically, can you convince businesses that they can increase their bottom line and or their productivity by allowing for the possibility of someone to become an employee who has a criminal record? You have to make that argument. That's all it is. At what point should we look past someone's criminal record to consider them for employment? What are the circumstances? What are the conditions where we should say, okay, at this point, we won't put any weight into your criminal past in consideration for employment? That's the argument you have to make. And I think there's an argument to be made. I think you guys have already made it in a lot of places. So, okay.
You mentioned when fair chance hiring is implemented and implemented well, people are not only brought into a company, but a company is accessing an enormous talent pool that otherwise is kept out.
Not inherently. There's probably a pool of talent, right? You're effectively adding to the number of people able to be considered for jobs, but simply having a criminal conviction does not then mean you possess talent. It's simply looking past the criminal conviction and considering everybody on the same basis as you would anyone coming to a job interview.
And that talent rises to the top, right?
Not necessarily. Well, I mean, hopefully so. Hopefully you are assessing people on talent, but as our second speaker on the panel here so clearly pointed out, talent is at best a secondary consideration next to the necessity of race.
Talent can be at all levels of an organization. And then as Shemaiah mentioned, that what the CEOs are coming to understand is that there are multiple lanes that they can get in. They can think about hiring, and as they're thinking about hiring, they can also be investing in talent development opportunities, partner with community-based organizations or community colleges, or starting apprenticeships. They can also be investing in entrepreneur and impact and social ventures that are investing in entrepreneurs who have records. They can be thinking really about policy and advocacy. And as Maha mentioned, there are organizations that can help them do that in a streamlined way, because what we see is that there are a number of ways that the legal system impacts whether or not people can access work.
Okay, hold on a second. Now, there's a line here between looking past, based on circumstances and certain policies, looking past someone's criminal record to assess them for employment in in the absence of that consideration. But now you're moving to, at least implicitly, giving preference to people for entrepreneurship opportunities and other things because they have a criminal conviction. Okay, that's not fair chance. That's just moving to a different kind of preferential treatment. All right. If you're trying to work people back into the system and look beyond their past bad acts and treat them fairly as you would anyone else who didn't have a criminal conviction in the past, fine. That's fair. That's fair. But if you're then going to say, oh, now we're going to give this opportunity only to people who have a criminal conviction, well, now you're putting a value on their past bad acts as opposed to anybody else coming to the table who doesn't, which is the exact opposite. So I don't know if that's what she meant to say, but that's how I took it, at least implicitly. So let's try to meter what our goals are here.
It's not only whether or not you can get a job, but it's whether or not you spend 3 nights in jail while your family struggles very hard to get enough money together to post bond, during which time you've lost your job. You're not going to be able to pay rent. You're not going to be able to pay your car, parking tickets, all of these things that if you have the means kind of take for granted can really impact whether or not people can get access to work.
Well, here's the first thing. Are we talking about somebody who has just committed a crime, or are we talking about people who have had a proven record and history of not committing crimes since they last committed a crime? Because if you commit a crime, there are going to be consequences for committing a crime that aren't going to be fun and will negatively impact you and your family because you committed a crime. What are you asking for here?
And at a time when employers really need talent, which is all the time, for employers to be more aware of that and understand that those issues that may seemingly be justice issues outside of their purview really do creep in significant ways to how much talent they're going to have access to and how people who already work with them are going to be impacted by these issues. It just gives us an opportunity, I think, to talk a different language and to learn from each sector what are the strengths we have to kind of move to a place where there's more equitable economic participation by what's really not a small segment of the population.
Well, wait. Are you talking about someone who is currently employed and commits a crime and that their employer should be giving some... I'm confused now. Are we talking about people with an established criminal history in the past that they're now looking for a second chance? Are you talking about how an employer treats an existing employee who is then incarcerated during the course of their employment? What? Okay, this sounds like two completely different subjects to me.
This isn't a small side conversation when there are 77 million adults, upwards of 100 million in a few years, that are impacted by this.
Impacted by this. Okay, again, your mileage may vary case to case, but generally speaking, they committed a crime at some point. They made a choice to violate the law. They're not victims. All right? Now, obviously, you can make the argument that, yes, okay, someone committed a crime, but they shouldn't have to have their freedom put on a price for bail ahead of trial. Okay, that's a fair argument. Okay, I mean there are some elements to our justice system as it currently stands where you could say, yes, but this policy, this procedure, whatever else, is not fair in and of itself. Okay, sure, but in general terms, when it comes to the aftermath of it all, you committed a crime, even if elements of the system are unfair or weighted unfairly in different places on the basis of finances, economics, and so on. Okay, fine. But you keep talking about this victim narrative. In these instances, there is a victim involved. It's usually the person that had their rights, their safety, their property violated by the people we're talking about. You really need to clarify what you mean and what population you're talking about here. Are you talking about people who committed a crime years in the past who are looking to have a fair shot at employment? Or are you talking about people who are in the midst of having to go through the justice system because of a crime they committed? And stop calling it being impacted by this. In one way, shape, or form, they put themselves in this peril.
Someone you know, the father or the parent of someone you know, the child of someone you know, is impacted by this. And so what we wanted to do for just a few minutes, and we maybe have 9 minutes if you have questions for Ken, who's going to be headlining a conference tomorrow morning in DC and has to rush to the airport. But if anybody wanted to just share before we give you time to talk at the tables, any questions or comments, aha moments that anybody wanted to share, and ask any questions of the panelists before we go to some table talk conversation.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Question time already.
Okay.
Oh, yes, in the back.
Okay, we can't hear them, obviously. Hopefully they'll restate the question. I can't even hear them.
Was that Shemaya's there were, yep.
Absolutely. So do I use this mic?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. So yes, so what we designed at CEO Action for Racial Equity, because I should probably tell you that we're made up of a bunch of fellows from various companies. I think I'm too loud. Am I too loud? Can you all hear me? I feel like I'm double speaking, but okay. So we're from the corporate sector. And so we literally said, what do we need to take back to our companies to kind of lower the risk, right? And so we know that day one, companies are just like, I'm from the financial sector. Y'all know the name of that game. And so, but I still needed my company and other companies from that sector to lean in. We don't want them to say that they cannot do it, because we absolutely know they can be supporting. So the 4 ways are direct hiring, which is the conversation.
Are you just going to repeat what you said before? I have a feeling that she is. Let's see. Thank you, Duke of Cheesecake. Aha moment. Well, I do enjoy Take On Me, Take On Me, Take Me On. I'll be gone. All right, I'll stop. Yes, I'm a living jukebox. I really haven't brought up that term in quite a while. That was something that Monkey branded me with a long time ago. It's true. You put one little bug in my ear or brain about a song that I know, and I'll just go off. So thank you, Dax. You pay $2, you get a song. Anyway, yes, so direct hiring.
We're having indirect hiring. So think about your entrepreneurs who want to become vendors at our companies. And then it's philanthropy, right? And so philanthropic dollars to workforce readiness organizations that are nonprofit, sewing into individuals, their skill sets, they now become our talent pipeline. And then the 4th is through advocacy.
Okay, so they asked you a question. I wish I could have heard the question that was being asked. I have a feeling that she was asking for, whoever was asking the question was asking for more details, and she just repeated her elevator pitch, which tells you almost nothing about what actually goes into it.
Can I add to it? I was going to take your mic, but I don't need it. For the philanthropy, I think it's wonderful, but I think Shemaya is also an example of what that is in terms of in-kind donations. Not to say that, but your time is money too. So also not simply money. Money is important. I come from a nonprofit. We need money, but also to think about pro bono legal services, but not just pro bono legal services, other services that you can provide in kind to nonprofits, accounting, marketing, communications. That could be super impactful, especially in local communities where smaller nonprofits need the support.
Okay, yeah, I get that. What do you want to see changed? I've heard a little bit here about like bail reform and considerations by courts. Like, okay, they mentioned, was it Denver? Right? Or Colorado. It was either Denver or Colorado or a combination there too. What is the fair chance policy being employed there? Like what are the terms? If that's what you want to see replicated across the United States, well, then give us a list like, okay, these are the terms, these are the restrictions, prerequisites that someone would have to meet in order to have their records suppressed or sealed, these are the considerations we want employers to start adopting when it comes to someone that comes to the table with a criminal conviction. Like, what specifically are you asking to have happen? Is that so difficult? Thank you, John Migda. Dogcat Fox is still a grapey. Don't you talk badly about Dogcat Fox. He's a sweet boy, aren't you, Dogcat Fox? Wowie, wow, wow. He doesn't, just stop. Just stop besmirching his good name. Jeez. Thank you, Chicago Mike. Money is one of my favorite Floyd songs. Money. I can't do it. Not going to do it. Not going to do it. Cha-ching. But you supposedly can play it during the beginning of Wizard of Oz. So, yeah.
And I will say one more thing, because again, I'm loving this conference for making me learn so much more. But I would also link it back to ESG in the sense of not only hiring is definitely there. It's a part of the S, it's also part of the G.
What?
But also to think about how your businesses are impacting justice outcomes for folks.
Why is it my responsibility as an employer to impact justice outcomes? Okay, if we're talking about fair chance hiring, you come to apply for a job. You either have the skills, education, and experience as the prerequisites for that job, or you don't. And if there is a consideration about your criminal past, then I have some kind of policy in place that says type of crime or amount of time since crime was committed or something else before I'll look past that. Why is it up to the employer to deal with justice outcomes? If I'm treating someone fairly, if I'm not looking at them as a charity case, if I'm not looking at them as an inherent victim, but as somebody that is coming to me for honest pay, for honest work, if that's all you want me to look at them as, which is fair, then why do I need to weigh a justice outcome?
There's a lot of problems with technology. Sorry. Like there's a lot of problems with facial recognition software potentially having algorithmic bias. And what does that mean when you sell it to law enforcement?
What?
Or even bail bondsmen advertising and knowing that they're focusing on communities of color. So
you okay. I hate to tell you this, but your own statements on this panel have already explained to you, have given the answer to that question. All right. If you're telling us that the criminal justice system impacts on a more broader scale African Americans or specific demographics, what was the Willie Sutton defense for why he robbed banks? Because that's where the money is. Okay, supply and demand. Bail bondsmen have a service they're going to supply. Where is the most demand? So bail bondsmen should just not be setting up in places or advertising to or networking through people who need bail bond services? What exactly are you asking to have happen there? Facial recognition software. What? Okay. Now you're getting into territory where you need to really explain yourself because I have no idea what any of this is supposed to mean. John Migda, thank you again. In the spirit of Floyd, can we put these people against the wall? No, John, no. And that was in the spirit of Floyd. It's not about being against the wall. It's being a brick in the wall. It's being part of the problem, presumably. Boy, everybody here. What is it? Is it the Pink Floyd? Is it because it's their 50th anniversary or whatever or something? Is that what it is? Is that the big Floyd push today? Because I've seen it on Twitter too.
Thinking about the ways that your stakeholders are also impacted by your business and going through all of those different communities that you serve.
What?
Doing that real deep dive into thinking through how are your products, your services, your engagement with your employees, your communities are also contributing to the disparities in our system and also the outcomes that individuals are then suffering from.
What are you talking about? Okay, I know. It is a futile request to make that I get some explanations here because it all sounds so high-minded and everything. But I don't know what you mean. Like, you need to think about these things. Like, why can't I just think about making a product or service and hiring people who have the ability to do the job? Why is all this other stuff my responsibility as an employer? You need to make that argument to me, because ultimately I don't understand what you mean. Facial recognition software? What? Justice outcomes? What?
And Maha raises a good point, because I think
Does
that
she?
also goes to how you can get broad engagement of members of your organization, community-based organizations, because people can be thinking about it from their individual places in the company.
Or maybe I should be thinking about my job, and those things shouldn't really be my concern, because I... Okay.
The social responsibility can think of strategies. Your accounting folks can think about who we use as vendors, how we think about audits. Like, there are different ways that people can contribute to that conversation.
Maybe I should think about vendors who can fulfill the needs of the company first and foremost. What considerations do you think I should be putting at the forefront of my decision making when it comes to vendors? Like, what? Good Lord.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to the conversation here about what people can do. And there's a lot of external things we can do, but we haven't talked a little about the internal things we can do, like when we look in the mirror and change our own implicit bias about the way that we look at people with records.
Okay. Okay. People with records. Okay. That's John Migda. The Wall album has a song about that. Does it? I will confess, I am not a Pink Floyd aficionado. Their bigger songs, I can remember some of the choruses and so on. So don't look to me for Pink Floyd trivia or recognition, because I probably couldn't help you. I may know more than I think I know, depending on the reference or question, but I'm a child of the 80s, and certainly when it comes to music, probably more so a child of the 90s. So I know Pink Floyd was around back then too, but still.
I mean, records have been formed in this country as a result of the war on drugs, racism, over-policing in Black and brown communities. And so it's really important for us to check ourselves first.
Okay, records have been formed because of racism. I mean, it's not impossible. All right, so check ourselves. Again, that's beside the point. You have to set a standard. What level of crime should be considered as irrelevant after an X period of time? What are you talking about? If you're going to set a standard to avoid biases and everything, then you should just be looking at what is the level of the crime and how much time has passed since the crime occurred that a clean record exists. If you want people to just treat everyone fairly, I mean, I'm happy to be convinced otherwise, but that seems to be the boilerplate bare bones of assessment if you want to go to a fair place. If you don't want race to be a factor, stop making race a factor.
And understand how we're viewing people who may have a criminal record, and then checking some of those biases we may bring into the conversation.
How about just, do they have a criminal record? And if so, what are the terms of it? The end.
My friends here are familiar with me saying this, so it might be trite, but I'll share it with you all. You know, the conversations that I have around the country, I don't ask people to lower the bar for being an employee at their company. We ask to lower the barrier.
Okay, yes, that, again, if we're just talking about looking past old convictions, yes.
And really what that means is just giving people a fair opportunity to be the best person for the job, despite what they may have done when they were 17 or 22 or 25 or whatever.
Yes, that, on that basis, in that spirit, you know, barring there being more particulars that I would object to, yes, I agree.
And that really requires a lot of courage for us to be able to do that, because this country has been brilliant, maybe the best in the world at othering people. And we've been doing it ever since this country's inception. So.
Okay, you don't make a whole lot of headway by vilifying everybody and their brother just reflexively. All right, set a policy, set a law, and hold people to account for abiding by that policy or law. Okay, yeah. Things were worse in the past. Yes.
So I think that if we can remove some of our own implicit bias and explicit bias.
Who are you talking about? Who are you assuming to know the mind of here?
In the process, and really focus on the candidate and what they bring to the table, and then offering support, whether that person is a veteran or from the LGBTQ community or someone who may have suffered a criminal conviction for something as stereotypical and heinous in many people's minds as committed a gang murder.
Yeah, no, I think if someone came to me having committed a gang murder, I might have a few more questions than someone who committed pot possession or stole a car 15 years ago or something. Yeah, no, I think there'd probably be a few more questions to ask about a gang murder. You put that alongside what? Someone's orientation and veteran status? What?
Right, in their life. 95% of the people that have been incarcerated are coming home.
Yeah.
And so we as a community, a broader community, have to ask ourselves, what type of supports and community members do we want? Right? And if we're practicing this bias and we're exiling people and marginalizing people, I'm not for sure that we can expect anything but a negative result.
Okay, well, again, it all depends the amount of time that's passed since the crime and the behavior of the individual since that time. But I hate to tell you this, if you committed a gang murder, your own example, you marginalized yourself. You put yourself on the opposite side of civilized society. The responsibility to work your way back into something of the good graces of the people around you, that is on you. It's not society's responsibility. What? Can you see how you can like start off with something that is fairly reasonable and then you start going into absolute la-la land? Okay, you're setting the bar here. Speaking of setting the bar, gang murder. I don't know how you come back from that one.
But I also think that if we foster opportunity and provide space for people to rebuild and to reset their lives, that we can find wonderful talent, which has been spoken about on this panel. So that I just wanted to flag that, it starts in the mirror first, and then we do the external work of actually creating programs and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, let me just back up a little bit and try to clarify. Do I think that there's absolutely no redemption to be had for someone who has committed something as serious as a gang murder, let's say? No, I don't think there's no possibility of redemption. I don't think there's no possibility of coming back from that or building a better life after something like that. Sure, if he's talking about some ridiculously horrific thing that you did as a teenager and 20 years go by, right? And you serve your sentence or whatever, 25 years, 30 years, you get out of jail. Should that person not be allowed? And they've served their time, right? Whether you think that, murder should have a limit on incarceration or not, they've served their time as doled out by the state. Should that person not have the opportunity to build a better life and a new life for themselves? No, I think they should. I think they should, right? I don't think that should necessarily mean this person should now be thrown off into the dustbin of history, etc. But it has to come after a showing of good behavior on the outside of the prison walls. Because being segregated away from society, yeah, you can't really do much damage, right? It depends on, okay, now that you've been released, you have to make a showing, a proving that you have changed, that you are no longer the person that committed the heinous crime. Now, should people coming out of jail have access to programs and opportunities to gain employment and to try to work their way back into the functional good graces of society? Yes, I think they should. If you make an honest effort at it, I don't see that there should be any barrier to somebody even coming back from as heinous a thing as our speaker says, a gang murder. Okay? I don't think that'll ever leave that person. I don't think something that heinous should necessarily ever be forgotten because someone's life was taken. We're not talking about, stealing a car, right? Or petty theft or something. Someone is no longer on the planet because of you. That should probably stay there. That shouldn't be suppressed or forgotten. But, completely rescinding someone's ability to make a living after they've served their time, I don't think that's fair either. But it all depends on the person. But still, gang murder. Let's just throw it out there. Like, okay, that's where we're going to start off with. I mean, a few more questions. Thank you, John Migda. Again, I always Minecraft peeps, but never do it with slur. Okay, I don't know what that means. I've never played Minecraft. I've never played a single moment of Minecraft. So if that is a Minecraft insider joke that I have now fallen for, well, you got me. Yeah, I don't know. But thank you, John Migda. Renovatio, why does he mention gang murder and not rape? Legally speaking, the lesser crime. Let's get him to make this speech at a feminist conference. I'll get the popcorn. I know. When it comes to sexual crimes and things, this is why they need to tell us what is a reasonable standard of, let's just, for the sake of, or I should say for lack of a better word, what is the reasonable standard of forgiveness when it comes to severity of crime, right? Or circumstance thereof. They need to outline this. What are they looking for? Even if it's just like, we want this, but we've been able so far to convince companies and or state legislatures to do this. Set the standard. What do you want to see specifically?
And this young lady here had a question.
I have a question for you, Ken, and for you as well, Maha.
Got it.
Great. My first question is related to advocacy. And if you could just describe, when I think about fair chance hiring, it seems like many other systems, you need to create a pipeline. Are there any specific parts of the criminal justice system before folks who are formerly incarcerated are no longer incarcerated that can be changed, that companies can advocate for specifically, like around maybe around rehabilitation programs that should exist while incarcerated that can kind of build a pipeline towards fair chance hiring? Can you say a little bit about some of those opportunities for advocacy? And then the question from
aren't you just answering your own question right there? Advocating for jobs and works programs within prisons leading up to release. You just what? Did I miss something there? Didn't you just outline the very specific things that you're asking them to detail? What?
Around automation and implicit bias. When you said the word automated clearance, my mind went to AI and some of the biases that are inherent there. So if you could say more about how is this automated process mitigating against potential bias?
Because it considers the level of the crime and the amount of time that's passed since the crime was adjudicated. It would, I mean, now I'm not a programmer of any particular note, but if you put into your legal record system a database query that runs once a year or something, or even every day, depending on if you want the effective date, that, okay, how many crimes have been adjudicated that meet this text, right? A very specific text, a very specific statute number, whatever, or have been flagged or tagged in this way. And how long since that crime was adjudicated or that person has been released, whatever the condition is. And if it meets that criteria, it is automatically deflagged as something that can be processed for public consumption or put out into a background check or something like that. It's not AI, it's just a couple of ones and zeros on some very specific things that do not take into account anything other than the crime committed and the amount of time that has passed since. That's what my sort of simplistic programmatical mind would think. But you're fearing AI, AI is going to suppress what, some people's records versus others based on other factors? Okay.
Sure, I'll take a first stab at that. I think that the criminal justice system in America has really focused on punishment in the last 150 years.
Yeah, imagine that. Yeah, trying to disincentivize and also being punitive over crime. Yeah, imagine that.
Versus transformation.
Okay, transformation primarily comes from within. You have to make the choice to change. And yes, there should be reasonable opportunities provided over the course of someone's incarceration to make that change if they choose to do so. But ultimately, it comes down to the individual, doesn't it?
I mean, in my mind, when someone is given a timeout in a prison system, it really should focus on transforming the individual.
They have to do that themselves. Either they regret their crime and want to change, or they don't care.
Right? Some people call it rehabilitation, which is returning to the state that you were before you got in prison, but many people haven't had a good state to begin with, which is how they end in prison.
Is it the state's responsibility to make you a better person? I mean, is that the state's responsibility? Now, again, I think it is beneficial for there to be programs and opportunities provided to people to make those changes and to prepare them for time once they are out of prison. I would certainly like someone who has taken the time to reflect on their crime, changed their attitude about the world, and as well possibly be able to contribute to society in the labor force after they get out of prison, rather than somebody who's going to immediately return because they have had no other options to the same life they lived before they went to prison. Certainly, but you can't guarantee that. And is it the state's responsibility to make people better people?
So I really think of it as transformation, an opportunity to play in different spaces and to learn different things. Mm-hmm. The prison system hasn't been great at it, much like the police force in America, much like the military in America. Like, they're very punishment oriented, that we're going to squash you and punish you and do things to you.
Is it the police's job to reform people's behavior? As far as the military is concerned, I'm not quite sure. What is the military a disciplinarian culture and organization? Yes, because it requires discipline and organization to do the things the military have to do. Is the military a perfect organization? Do they treat their soldiers well in every instance? No, certainly not. But what's your gripe against the military specifically? And why are you putting onto police a responsibility that isn't there? To protect and serve, not to counsel, rehabilitate, reform.
And that's probably the wrong approach. Norway has shown that it's the wrong approach. And usually when you embrace people and lift people up and provide space and opportunity, you get a better outcome. I mean, who would ever thought that if you treat a human well, you get a good result?
Yeah, wow. Okay, so you're just shitting all over the military and police officers because they're obviously inherently evil and treat everybody badly. Is that it?
And so in reference to your question about policy and advocacy,
yeah, which is actually what she asked, nothing about police or military.
I'll just share as briefly as I can something that happened to me because I'm justice impacted.
You're justice impacted. You're justice impacted. Okay.
I served 24 years in prison.
You served 24 years in prison.
And during those 24 years, I wasn't given access to a single vocational program.
Okay, well, if that's true, that's probably counterproductive. I'll grant you that.
So I actually walked out of prison in the same state, by the state. Of course, I did my own learning.
Oh, of course you did your own learning. Okay, so you took the initiative in the course of those 24 years to change yourself, did you? And now you're sitting on a stage as a, what was it, vice president of a company? Well, good for you. You built yourself up from something that I can only imagine was a terrible crime, if you had to serve 24 years for it, into a productive, contributing member of society in the absence of the state providing you vocational opportunities, if I'm taking your story as truth, and I don't have any reason not to. So credit where credit is due. Good for you.
By the state in the same way that I went in. And I thought that that was unfortunate.
Again, even if they had offered you vocational opportunities, okay, would that have inherently and necessarily turned you into a better person? Doesn't that have to come from the individual first and foremost?
Not just for myself, because I knew I was going to make it, but for other people that are like me. And so when I came home, I also saw that the reentry system that was set up didn't create space for reskilling programs, upskilling programs, and that the expectation was that, hey, you probably need to go put on an orange vest and pick up trash on the side of the freeway for $14 an hour.
Again, I've got no problem with either in-prison and post-prison programs that provide vocational education, skills-based education to people to help integrate them back into society. I hope that his situation, however long ago this was, has drastically changed in whatever jurisdiction he used to live in. If it hasn't, I hope it does, because there is some benefit to that. I mean, yeah, if you give people no opportunities, then yeah, they're going to come out in exactly the same form as they went in, insofar as their ability to contribute to society and the economy. So yes, I agree. There is some benefit, and there should be offered the opportunities for vocational and skills-based training, both in prison and post-prison, to try to get people a leg up into moving back into the working world. So on that score, pushing at an open door.
And, I live in the Bay Area. So like $14 an hour is about enough for me to get a tent and sleep on some street in Berkeley.
$14 an hour? Yeah, well, I don't know what it costs to live in the Bay Area, strangely enough.
Right? So I started to advocate for reskilling programs that mirrored the first year of a college campus. How could we provide space for housing and wraparound services and a universal basic income while giving people space and opportunity to learn?
Universal basic income? Okay.
And to reskill and to pathway into the middle class economy in a meaningful way. That idea picked up some traction from an advocacy standpoint in the California legislature. And, I happen to be part of an effort and lead an effort to be written into the budget for $28.5 million in last year's California budget, and work with Governor Newsom's team to build out this kind of reskilling first-year college campus type of program to provide justice-impacted men and women the skills necessary to access livable wage in a meaningful way.
Okay. The core of what he's advocating for the most part, I can get on board with, but it's this constant victim narrative, justice impacted. You committed a crime, and now you're having to reintegrate into society. Okay, you are not wholly a victim. Maybe there are some unfair or uneven elements to the justice system, but you wouldn't be there in the first place if you had not victimized somebody else by your own volition, by your own actions. This justice impacted thing really puts a poison pill onto when I hear someone advocating for this kind of stuff, because it's automatically assuming and trying to frame anybody going through this as an inherent victim. Okay, you were able to build yourself up out of prison in the absence of these programs, and good for you. I say there should be such programs because, yeah, providing more opportunities for people to reintegrate into society is better than none at all. All right, but you are not a victim. You are not a victim of the consequences of your actions. You did the crime. You did the time. Should you be immediately sent away and not considered again for the world and society and the economy as a result? No. You did the crime, but you did your time. And then you took the initiative to build yourself up into a better person. And good for you. But let's be honest here. There are victims involved in these situations. Real victims. Seems to go by the wayside. Okay, I'm over the hour and a half point in real time. I don't think I need to do a part 2. I think we've got the gist. I was wondering what fair chance hiring was. I didn't have any context for it. Now I know, and knowing is half the battle. So what do you guys think? I'll take a couple minutes here for anything else you guys want to say, and then I will wrap up. Sir Adamantine, scribe! Sir Adamantine and his House of Celestial Sins. Let's see. Who else has anything else to say? I think Lexi Mads had to take off. Have a great day, Lexi. Even though you might not be hearing this right now. Hope you have a good rest of your day. Dax, Duke of Cheesecake. Say it with me, meritocracy. If a nonviolent felon wants to reintegrate and he's a boss engineer and wasn't convicted of stealing from a company they worked for, give them a shot. Yeah, again, case-by-case basis, setting some kind of standard. And an employer should be allowed to set a standard that's even, if they want to, more forgiving than whatever might be laid down in state law or something else, right? If the state law says, we require employers to consider people for jobs or look past situations where someone's been convicted of this level of crime and 10 years have passed. And if another employer wants to say, well, I'm fine with people, depending on circumstances, who have been convicted of this level of crime and only 7 years have passed. Whatever they want to do, every hire, regardless of a criminal conviction or not, is a risk of a kind. Are they going to work out? Aren't they? Some people might look great on paper and everything looks fine. And then 3 weeks into their job, they decide to take a 2-month vacation or something, trying to set a standard that looks past certain levels of convictions or time spent without a record. Again, I'm not against that in principle. I don't see any problem with that. Scanner Daffley, you hurt people. You need to be punished for that. While you're being punished, you can be rehabilitated if you try to rehabilitate yourself. This is straight up a responsibility dodge. Yes and no. Again, like I say, if you just put someone into prison and for all intents and purposes, you provide them a static environment that that essentially freezes them in time from the moment they go into prison, you're not doing anything. And I think you are inherently providing a disservice to the future society this person is going to enter without giving them the opportunity to improve themselves and prepare for a life outside of prison. But again, it's opportunity. They have to take the initiative. They have to instill in themselves a different mindset towards themselves, their life, other people in society by the time they get out. If they were given all the opportunities available in prison and then they go out and commit further crimes, well, might have been a wasted effort, but hopefully the benefit to society for all the people that do take advantage of that and do see a future outside of prison. So I agree with the notion of having both in prison and after prison programs for moving people into skills-based work or employment opportunities so they can start earning their own money, getting their own place, building a life, and so on, if they choose to do so. That's up to them, just like everything else. But I get the whole victim narrative thing really gets on my nerves. Pissed off Shih Tzu, how about a liability waiver? If an ex-con commits a crime against a customer, that will be bad for the company. Sure. Oh, you mean like in the course of doing their job or something? Like I hire someone who was convicted of assault 3 years ago and then they punch a customer for some reason. I'm not liable then. I don't know that I'd want to let the company off the hook if they knowingly hired somebody with a record. I guess that would have to be consideration of the whole state law thing. Would that be something that the state would provide hold harmless against the company if they applied some kind of, like, if the company abides by the fair chance hiring laws, and there's not something baked into that legislation that provides an employer a pathway to hold harmless in such instances. Maybe. I don't know. That's an interesting question. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know what's been applied in the laws they were talking about in Colorado, but that would be something to think about, wouldn't it? Like if I'm going to go, or if I'm being made by the state to make these considerations or concessions, what's in it for me? Like, what kind of coverage do I have if something goes sideways? Interesting. Let's see. Renovation, a system which puts the convicted above those who have never committed a crime is a system which promotes criminality as a positive. I'm very pro-integration, second chance, but I'm not making crime one up. Well, that's what I was talking about earlier. If you want to make it a place where a past criminal conviction based on certain prerequisites is an ignorable element of someone's background, like you're either not allowed to consider it or you don't consider it, whichever. That's one thing. But what the other lady was implying was that looking to vendors to employ or to work with because they have a past criminal conviction, that's where I was kind of like, no. Either a long ago minor or otherwise paid for criminal conviction is a non-consideration, or it's a consideration. It's either a benefit to someone's consideration or it doesn't apply at all. And if you're talking about fair chance, then it should be a null, N-U-L-L. It should be a null element to giving somebody the opportunity to get a job or to get a contract or whatever else. It shouldn't be a benefit. It should be a non-consideration, if that's what you're aiming for. And Simon Willikins, don't let the company off the hook for its employees' left hook. Ayo! There you go. And I think I'll give Simon there the last word on the subject. What do you guys think? If I didn't get to your comment or thought in the chat here, please leave a comment below. Apparently that helps out with the algorithm. Also, if you haven't already, hit that like button. I don't usually beg for likes, but hey, I appreciate the signifier that you at least appreciated the show. If you didn't like the show, hey, hit the dislike button. I can see those, strangely enough. And I don't mind it. I'm not perfect. I try my best. I will try to rehabilitate myself as time goes on. But yeah, and programming note, and I mean this, I do. The weekend of February 4th, I don't have a specific time yet or the day, but somewhere within that weekend, hopefully, I'll be doing my second broadcast, my second edition of Living on Borrowed Crime, where I talk to true crime content creators. And upcoming on that weekend, Dave's Lemonade. If you guys have not heard of Dave's Lemonade, go check him out on YouTube. He does true crime content analyzing trials and various crimes, as well as the old To Catch a Predator segments. And he's a really, really nice guy with a really interesting perspective on it. And if you like some long-form true crime stuff to put on in the background or to listen to while you're working or doing something else, or just pay attention to directly, I recommend him. And if you do check out his stuff and you like it, say hi to Dave. He likes it when you say hi. And let him know I sent you, because I don't know, that makes me feel good, I suppose. Anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining me. Hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everybody who donated either to myself or to the fundraisers pinned at the top of the chat box, thank you guys so much for your generosity. Really, really do appreciate it. Hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday and weekend. Hope the week ahead of you is relatively calm and stress-free. I know sometimes it's difficult to get there, but I hope you do. And I hope you are all safe and well. If you are not well, guys, please get well soon. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.